Charlemagne. The name itself just echoes through history. But here's the big question. Was he a visionary who built modern Europe, or was he a brutal warlord who forged it in blood? His shadow looms so large over the entire medieval period, it's honestly almost impossible to imagine what the continent would look like without him. People call him the Father of Europe. Now that is a powerful title, isn't it? For centuries, this is pretty much how he's been remembered, as the guy who brought the light back to the so-called Dark Ages and laid the very foundation for Western civilization as we know it. But that's what we're really going to dig into today. Who was the man behind that legend? Was he a visionary unifier, a ruthless warlord, or, as is often the case, was he something way more complex? Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first. We have to start with how Charlemagne rose to power. And let me tell you, it was anything but peaceful. He built his empire with one main tool: relentless and often incredibly brutal military conquest. So originally, he was actually co-ruling the Franks with his brother, Carloman. But then, in 771, Carloman suddenly dies. And Charlemagne? He did not hesitate for a second. He swiftly seized his brother's lands, forced his sister-in-law and his nephews into exile, and just like that, in one single move, he became the undisputed king of the Franks. And with all that power consolidated, he went to war. And I mean, for the next 3 decades, it was basically nonstop. He conquered the Lombards in Italy, he absorbed Bavaria, he crushed the Avars in the east. But really, the centerpiece of his entire military career, that was the Saxon Wars, a brutal 30-year grinding conflict that came to define his entire reign. And the result of all this fighting? It was absolutely staggering. For the first time since the fall of the Western Roman Empire hundreds of years earlier, a single ruler controlled most of Western and Central Europe. He had literally stitched a fractured continent back together with iron and with blood. But that unity, it came at a terrible, terrible cost. Just look at this number, 4,500. This single number represents one of the absolute darkest moments of his entire reign. What it refers to is the massacre of Verdun. In a single day, Charlemagne had 4,500 captured Saxon rebels beheaded. This wasn't a battle. It was an act of calculated terror, designed to just crush their resistance once and for all. And it perfectly captures the duality of the man, right? He's a unifier, but he used the most extreme violence to achieve his goals. All of this military might was building towards something, towards the absolute peak of his power. See, having conquered this vast territory, Charlemagne was about to get a title that hadn't been held in the West for 300 years: emperor. The stage for this was set by a major crisis in Rome. The Pope at the time, Leo III, was actually physically attacked by his enemies in the city and had to flee for his life. And where did he go? He went straight to Charlemagne for safety. So Charlemagne marches to Rome, puts the Pope back in power, and really cements his role as the ultimate protector of the papacy. And in return for that protection, on Christmas Day, in the year 800, the Pope crowned him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans. Now, the weight of that title was just immense. It was a direct link back to the glory of ancient Rome, a symbolic rebirth of an empire in the West. It was a powerful declaration that a new, legitimate power had arrived. But here's the big debate. Was it a surprise? His biographer, a guy named Enhard, he claims Charlemagne was totally caught off guard, and that he wouldn't have even gone to the church that day if he'd known what the Pope was planning. But most modern historians, they see this as a masterful piece of political theater, something carefully planned by Charlemagne himself to legitimize his enormous authority with the ultimate historic title. But here's the thing, Charlemagne was so much more than just a warrior. With his empire now secured by the sword, he turned to building a culture to match it. And in doing so, he sparked a revival of learning that we now call the Carolingian Renaissance. And this was a really deliberate effort. He wanted to create a more effective and educated clergy and a more unified Christian empire. He really understood that you don't just hold an empire together with armies. You hold it together with shared ideas and institutions. And he was incredibly practical about it. His court in Aachen basically became a magnet for the best scholars from all over Europe. He set up schools, he reformed laws, and he standardized currency. And one of his most lasting innovations, something you might not even realize, was the creation of a new script, the Carolingian minuscule. It was this clear, legible handwriting with upper and lowercase letters. and it's the direct ancestor of the typefaces we all use today. And here's a wonderfully humanizing little detail. Despite being this incredible patron of learning, Charlemagne himself really struggled to learn how to write. His biographer Einhard tells us he used to keep tablets under his pillow to practice, but he had just started too late in life. Think about that. The most powerful man in Europe couldn't quite master his letters. His influence wasn't just limited to Europe, either. Not at all. He engaged in diplomacy with powers as far away as the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. And in one of the most famous diplomatic exchanges of the entire era, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid sent him this incredible gift, an actual Asian elephant named Abul Abbas. You can just imagine the sensation that caused at the Frankish court.
So after this larger-than-life figure was finally gone, what happened? What was his ultimate legacy?
Well, Charlemagne died in the year 814, and the immense empire that he had held together through pretty much sheer force of will, it soon began to fracture. It was just too vast, too diverse to be governed by successors who weren't nearly as formidable as he was. After a period of nasty civil war, his three grandsons met and signed something called the Treaty of Verdun in 843. What they did was, they carved up the empire into three kingdoms, West Francia, East Francia, and a Middle Kingdom. And in a great historical irony, these very divisions laid the groundwork for the modern nations of France and Germany. So his unified empire died, but from its ashes, modern Europe slowly began to take shape.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Was he a savage conqueror responsible for massacres, or was he the visionary father of a continent? The truth, of course, is that he was both. And it's that complexity, that contradiction, that makes him, and the Europe he forged, so endlessly fascinating to study.